Good morning and welcome back to DSP Leaders World Forum. It's day 2, Tuesday the 12th of May, and coming up now is our session on expanding and coordinating the open telecoms ecosystem. Before we start, a quick reminder that if you want to ask questions later or join the Extra Shot with Ray LeMaitre programs, then get in touch with us as soon as possible. Details are right here on the TelecomTV site, along with our latest polling question. And so to our panel, expanding and coordinating the open telecoms ecosystem. The message from service providers to their network equipment suppliers is very clear. They want a broader and more open ecosystem, enabling more choice and facilitating greater innovation, as well as price competition, of course. But they also want a more coordinated approach to technology development with far greater dialogue and information exchange between the different standards bodies and open source projects. So, is the industry listening and acting? Well, let's ask our guests, and I'm delighted to introduce Ildiko Vancha, who is Ecosystem Technical Lead with the OpenStack Foundation, David Boswarthick, who is Director of New Technologies at ETSI, Chris Price, President of Ericsson Software Technology, and Klaus Martiny, Senior Program Manager at Deutsche Telekom and the Chair of the ETSI ZSM ISG. Hello everybody, thanks so much for joining us today.
Morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
I'd like to ask each of you in turn an opening question, which is, where are we? What's the general health of the telecoms ecosystem? You know, are the various organizations and foundations doing what is required to help CSPs on their evolution path to becoming DSPs? Chris, let me start with you. What's the health of the ecosystem, do you think?
Well, I would say we're quite healthy as an ecosystem. I mean, telecommunications is on the back of COVID, for instance, proven to be a worthwhile and valuable infrastructure for global communications. As an ecosystem, I think there is a strong and healthy future for us. To the question of where do we stand on our digital journey, if you like, to create a broader ecosystem across a number of different vertical industries. We're progressing, I think, and as an industry, I think we're progressing at a faster rate than we have, as does everyone these days. You know, we iterate much quicker each time we go through a change cycle.
Thanks, Chris. Ildiko, what do you feel is the general health of the ecosystem?
Well, my viewpoint is obviously completely different because I'm working for an open source foundation right now, and I would say that from what I see, the telecom industry is way more engaged in the open environment as they used to be. When it comes to the quicker reaction and moving more quicker, I still see some struggles in the areas of which release should we use. Should that be the one from 2 years ago or the one from 5 years ago, because that one might be more stable. But in terms of engagement, I think they came a long way. So what a foundation can do in this situation is of course, we can't fix anything or anyone who doesn't want to be fixed. What we can do is do evangelism and education and encouragement. So technically, talk as much about what open source is as possible, and show the value of participation as much as possible. And I think the telecom industry, as closed as they used to be, started to see the advantages of this type of model. So I see a lot more operators and a lot more vendors to talk about what they want to achieve, where they want to go, and talk about new technologies. I think the cloud journey was obviously really complicated because it was a really big technology shift, and doing somewhat together with a shift towards open source as well. I think it was just a really big step to take. But when it comes to exploring new technologies like the uprising of containers, again, or looking into edge computing and the new use cases and the new solutions, I think how the ecosystem looks like right now, we are on the right track to succeed together.
Thank you, Ildiko. David, what's the general health of the telecoms ecosystem? What's ETSI's view? Are the various organisations and foundations doing enough to help CSPs in their evolution to DSPs?
I think what we're doing now is we're listening and we're learning. So our members are telling us, we're getting slightly unusual comments from our members saying, what is ETSI doing here? What is ETSI doing there? Are you thinking about the impact of this global virus on ETSI as a standards body and to the industry as well? So there's a lot of questioning going on. We've seen that telecoms and connectivity is essential to people's lives. We need to be able to connect to our family, to our friends, to our businesses, and that communication layer needs to be there. On top of that, we have the applications, new applications giving us data about the spread of pandemics, the state of the economy. All of this is essential. So the telecoms industry is even more relevant today. Standards, we need to ensure that we remain relevant. Well, that doesn't mean we're desperately looking for relevance, but we need to make sure that we're serving the evolving needs of our members. And that's not just the big telco operators and the big telco vendors. It's the health industry, it's the transportation industry, it's the smaller vendors. We have possibly 20 to 25% of our members are small to medium enterprise. 10% are research institutes. So at the same time that we're dealing with the big telecom operators, the big service providers, we need to ensure that we can engage and listen to these smaller companies as well. So yes, I think the industry is very healthy, very relevant, but evolving very quickly.
Klaus, you're chairman of one of the ISGs of ETSI. From your perspective, what is the current state and health of the ecosystem?
In my role as ISG of ZSM, ZSM has in the scope to deliver automation end-to-end. That means really completely end-to-end. And one of our ideas is to do it not alone, using standardization solutions from other bodies and open source as well. And based on that, I can say that the organizations, SDOs and open source communities are willing to contribute, but I think we can do it much, much faster than we're doing it today. And from telco point of view, I think, yes, we are in a healthy position, but if you're looking forward at what is needed in the future, then I think we should do it better than we are doing it today. Better in terms of acceptance of already delivered standards or open source project. I think we need both. We need standards and we need open source solutions as well. Where we have to find a way how we can contribute and collaborate between both parts of our industry. And also from an operator point of view, I think because I'm with Deutsche Telekom, we are discussing it very deeply what is needed to create a new ecosystem in the future. And for sure, we have also to understand how we can partner with other companies. And that is something what we have to discuss really more in detail in the future, what is needed in order to create a new ecosystem for the complete industry and not only competing and between each other. I think we need more a partner understanding instead of a competition understanding.
We hear so often and for so long that we need to communicate better amongst ourselves and between the groups. Maybe from an outsider's perspective, this seems really easy. Surely, you just talk to each other and you coordinate. But I guess when you're in there, it's a lot more difficult. Chris, just how difficult is this? Because at times it's surprisingly complex to me.
I think the difficulty isn't being able to do the work. I think the difficulty is changing how we go about doing work. From a traditional standardization perspective, we had engineering organizations, strategic organizations, planning organizations, and we worked in and amongst standards to perform planning and alignment and have those dialogues, that communication around what it is that we as an industry are going to move towards. Open source emerged through Linux and beyond now to almost everywhere as a different way of approaching that, and it's a different skill set required to approach that. Thus, different people in any given organization need to be involved in the planning, the strategy, the how we're going to go about doing things, and they need to then collaborate with the standardization focused individuals with those skill sets and come up with a cohesive structure around how we actually move forwards. And that's challenging to do, and each company has to go through that process. And then we have to meet in the open world again and be able to coordinate conversations across multiple levels. So yes, we can go out and talk and we can communicate and we can plan, but the amount of planning and coordination has become significantly more complex in today's environment than it was in the past. And that's okay, that's good, that allows us to move faster, but we have to recognize that it does require further investments in hearing the right people, planning around good information, and then cohesively as an industry moving forward into those dialogues in a meaningful way and being able to adjust according to need.
Thanks, Chris. David, ETSI has been doing the standards work for a considerable number of years now. It's got well tried and tested processes in place. The current pandemic that we're seeing has having an impact. I mean, we're only hearing a few weeks ago about 3GPP, for instance, with a delay in the next 5G release cycle because of the difficulties of working purely in an online situation. And we realize the need for people to get together and create consensus. But can you leverage the considerable work and experience that ETSI has? Is this a model going forward that you can successfully build on to encourage greater collaboration?
I'm no longer active in 3GPP. I'm working only with ETSI now, but I know in 3GPP they're having to replace large plenary meetings where you may have 200, 300, 400 people in a room with a GoToMeeting or a conference call. That's not easy to do. So a week's meeting will be broken down into hours and hours and hours of conference call. I don't know if you enjoy conference calls, but to concentrate on a technical meeting for hours per day is not easy. So obviously things are changing. People are having to evolve. But all the time, I know that the teams are looking at new tools and new ways, whiteboard techniques, consensus building techniques that can be used electronically alongside the more traditional techniques. So it's all about really not making it up as you go along, but finding the best of breed, seeing what's out there, testing it, seeing if people can work with it, and then putting it in the field for now. I mean, this has only been with us for, let's say, months. How are we going to go forward for the next 2 months? And then when we get to something we would call the new normal, which is we're never going to go backwards. We're always going to go forwards. So adding in more electronic tools, more virtual meetings to ensure that consensus comes quicker and we can get to standards which are available to the end a lot faster, which I think is what is.
Can we move on to looking at, I guess, the size of the ecosystem and ensuring that the ecosystem covers exactly what CSPs want? Ildiko, disaggregation promised an increase in the number of vendors and participants and choices for service providers. I mean, we did see a surge and we did see a number of new companies emerge, and some of them are doing quite well or appear to be doing quite well. But are we seeing enough? Are we seeing the increase in companies and innovation that we had originally foreseen?
That's a good question, especially because I'm less looking on the business side of things. So I think when it comes to new areas like 5G, edge computing, both large companies has to change, come up with new business models, new processes, new ways of working, and we will always see a lot of startups as well as some companies switching angles and focusing on new and emerging use cases and technologies. So I think from that perspective, the field is quite colorful, and I think from what I see is that from collaboration perspective, when we have new startups showing up, they are usually way more active in open source activities, for instance, especially because they usually don't have traditional ways of working, and what Chris was describing of different departments of a large company trying to figure out how to communicate with each other, how to cover all the aspects from engineering through standardization to testing and productization and all that, but rather they are a more dynamic organization. So I think when it comes to looking around in the ecosystem from that perspective, we always have to keep in mind how existing companies can kind of reinvent themselves and learn from those who are popping up, as opposed to just looking into whether the field is saturated enough or not.
Thanks. Klaus, if I can follow up with what Ildiko was mentioning there, a lot of new companies, yes, I can see the appeal with the open source community, but what about their involvement in the standards work? I mean, automation as ESM is a very hot topic, getting a lot of interest, but are you seeing a sufficient widening of the ecosystem?
Well, I think that is obviously the case or needed that we have to widen the ecosystem, because new partners coming on board is really a question how we can do that, how we can make it bigger than it is today, and how we can orchestrate all resources which are coming now on board, new companies and old companies. To be honest, I have to say, if I'm looking around the industry, that we have so many different companies and SDOs which are contributing their ideas to the standards, I think we have to shrink ourselves a little bit more, that we have to focus on the right standards which are needed, and also on the open source community. I think these new companies which are coming aboard, they have always a challenge to spend the resources which are needed to deliver standards for a standard organization like ETSI or CGPP. Sometimes they are simpler for them to go into the open source communities because they are jumping in and jumping out and nobody cares. That is something what we have to consider. So we have, from a standardization point of view, we have to enable the smaller companies to contribute, maybe with less resources than they normally have to spend to an organization. And really, what I think we have to do is not only discussing the collaboration and cooperation between SDOs internally and with open source communities. I think we have to do that. On concrete projects, we have to agree how we can deliver proper technology for the future, and not only talking about them.
Chris, is it also a case that it's not just about the open source foundations and standards organizations, but the operators themselves, the CSPs, they could do more with their internal processes. They could take a new look at their procurement systems, which have been set in stone for so many years. And do we need to change that angle in order to create a healthier ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's important to recognize that telecommunications is a regulated market, and regulated in different regions and in different countries. And a lot of the processes around asset acquisition and purchasing relate to how these networks are eventually measured and how they're trusted. So it's very difficult just to say change everything and let's go something new. Let's be an open source consumer. What we do see is that a lot of telecommunications companies now are starting to bring open source into their networks in a controlled way, so that they know that they can still pass regulation, they can pass muster as far as having an operative and trustworthy network, while starting to be able to accommodate and adapt to some of the innovation that's going on and enable new verticals to be deployed across their networks. So the short answer is yes, we need to see a change to how that works. The longer answer is we can't just do it away, because there is no way that their network works around the planet. We are a global ecosystem. So we need to work with the standardization bodies, which is the organizations that help us create these regulations and help us make the networks trustworthy. And we need to innovate through the open source organizations to enable us to quickly adopt and bring in new technologies in a way that still fulfills the needs of the network. So it's not just a one or the other. There is a delicate balance that we need to find. And what we do see today already is that operators are starting to walk that path. They're starting to consume from open source, and they're starting to bring those technologies in and blend them with the traditional architectures and network components that they have today.
Sorry for jumping in. I think that's a very valid question, and how we can do business in the future based on what context, based on which business model we have. I think what is already ongoing is discussion about the contract situation, how we can design contracts in the future. For the time being, I think based on the classical approach, where a vendor sitting on the left side, the operators on the right side, and they have hard fights about the price. For sure, that is normal behavior in order to save money, to bring the cost down from an operator point of view, and to increase the value for the vendor as well. But I think this discussion should be changed as well. We have to talk really about partner models, and not in the old days we talk about partners models as well. But what that doesn't mean, it was more as a preferred supplier situation. I think we have to think more differently if we're talking about the creation of a contract between vendors and operators. I think it could be happen that we have on the one side that the costs for an operator will be higher, and because they will get on another side from a vendor more value than he would become before if you have a service-based contract. What I mean, both sides, operators, vendors, and for sure open source community as well, we have to understand that we have to bring the cost discussion and payment discussion in balance instead to try to achieve the maximum on both sides. I think that is something what this discussion should be started. And we have to discuss it more in detail. What does it mean? And I think we have definitely changed our behaviors in this industry in order to create technology on one hand side, and in order to create context on the another side.
Thanks, Klaus. Ildiko, I'd like to just move on slightly, or continue in these points really, but also broaden it out to. As we broaden the ecosystem, as more companies from the enterprise side come in and want to play in telecom space, are we still facing this hurdle, or maybe it's a mental one, of carrier grade, and what carrier grade means, whether things are carrier grade or not carrier grade? Is this still an issue?
I don't think it's an issue. I think it's still something that is very important. So the 5 nines or 6 or 4, I don't know where they stand today, to be honest. But we still have to make sure that the backbone infrastructure is stable, robust, and flexible at the same time. It can handle the new use cases, the increased loads, especially at times like this. So it is still there. And I think when I look back to the past few years of OpenStack, there has been a lot of enhancements and new functionality added that are supporting to make OpenStack as a platform more, well, so to say, carrier grade as well. Obviously, it's not just the benefit for the telecom industry, it's a benefit from all other industries who are looking into using a cloud platform. But it's definitely something that the community has been looking into, and it's not just our community. There are many other networking type of projects out there, and I think these aspects will always be on the top shelf and on the highest priority. So I don't think that carrier grade as is will go away. I think it's more about the approach where you fix those issues, and whether making a platform carrier grade will be an added value of a vendor, or whether making something carrier grade happens in the open source ecosystem. That's something that is shifting a little. I don't know how much further away it will shift. Like I've seen telecom operators deploying the pure open source version of OpenStack and operating it themselves. And obviously there is the trust model of other vendors who have other operators who have their vendors who they have been working with for quite a while, and they get their platform from those vendors, and those are usually hardened and fixed up even more. So it's probably somewhat of a balancing act, and also it also depends on the like what the operators prefer to do, like if they have access to vendors who would deploy and operate the infrastructure for them, or it's better if they do it themselves. If it's something that they can save money on, it's better for their business or not. So the business model itself is also different based on each individual case. But I think that when it comes to the open source ecosystem, collaboration is the way to go. So we definitely can fix things up together faster, easier, and when you look at the cost, it will be lower for everyone. So I think that is what makes the difference here. And when it comes to where you make things carrier grade, like the cloud platform itself is something that everybody needs. It's not necessarily the highest on the list of where the income is coming from. So it's definitely an area where it's easier to work together and say that, okay, we will all put our things into that common bucket and do it for the industry's good, as opposed to relying on vendors, fixing things up one by one, and then it ending up being really expensive.
Okay, thanks. Chris, what's your view here on whether carrier grade is still a hurdle, especially as we have this greater focus, or we're supposed to have this greater focus on software-based functionalities?
It's good to understand what carrier grade means. I think carrier grade was an agreement between an operator and a vendor on this won't fail. You're going to put it in a pipeline that is the service that you provide, and this component will not be the reason that your network fails. And carrier grade means that this is going to stay operational for you. That need does not go away. It's more apparent than ever. I think what you're alluding to now is how does that affect the software side when we start to move into what Ildiko was talking about, that cloud platform piece? When I have a trustworthy cloud platform, I have to determine how much trust do I place in the platform, and then how much trust do I have to put into the service, the way the services are structured, and how they're deployed on top of those that ubiquitous platform that I run all my applications on. It doesn't go away. The need is absolutely still there, but we have new tools, we have new methods to essentially address the problem of this cannot fail, right? We can have standby services, we can spin up new services when something fails. We have a lot more flexibility in how things work when they're moved into this virtual environment. It comes also with limitations, right? So we're then limited by the tools that are available in the cloud. And while I may have saved something, while I may have solved a problem in a traditional router in a particular way, I'm no longer able to do that in a cloud because those tools are no longer available to me because I now sit in this abstracted layer. So there's a contract now between the abstraction, that cloud layer, and the application itself that needs to provide that proof that this will not fail. There needs to be an understanding between the application and what it's running on. And this is one of the challenges we have as an industry, right? We move into, okay, now we need to run in virtual machines so that we can have portability. Now we need to run everything in containers so that we can have flexibility. These are tools to solve for an application or a use case. Which tools are the best to use isn't necessarily, it's just the coolest thing. It can also be, what does it actually provide me and how does that solve the problem my application needs to solve? So the contract doesn't go away, but the contract changes and it becomes slightly more complex in that I'm now not just writing an application on some hardware. I now have abstraction layers, and I now have different mechanisms that will be part of that solution.
But is this complexity you've just mentioned there, Chris, is this going to hamper and hinder entry to the supplier ecosystem?
To be honest, it provides opportunities for the smaller players. If I'm able to, if I'm able to run my softwares in a virtual environment, a known environment that has certain capabilities, be it OpenStack or Kubernetes, I know what I'm getting into when I get into that environment. I'm able to then provide a piece part of an end-to-end solution without necessarily being tightly coupled to the other parts of the solution. I can provide software into that space. And that provides a slightly easier on-ramp than we have traditionally had. If you're traditionally going to enter a market, you're selling a box which comes for everything from the power cable all the way up to the way the thing's provisioned was what had to be sold into that ecosystem. So it simplifies how to enter the ecosystem, but it also adds complexity in that you're still part of a broader ecosystem. So you have to partner with other members of that ecosystem, and you have to build something which works as a whole. Right? It's a little more complex in how we can develop and deploy in this ecosystem than it was. I used to be able to sell a box. It was hard to build a box, but once I had the box, I could sell it. These days, I can make the software much easier, but I have to invest more time on making that software work in an end-to-end context.
David, you're looking at new technologies in ETSI. Are there any particular parts of the infrastructure equipment ecosystem that are in need of maybe fresh alternative approaches? I mean, it's often been said, for instance, and I know you're not in 3GPP now, it's often been said that the RAN sector, the radio access side, is a bit narrow and could do with broadening out. Are there any areas there that we could do with an extra focus on?
I would say let's build on what we have already, because we've had a lot of acceleration over the past five years with SDN, NFV, Edge. Let's not run after the next buzzword or the next hot topic. Let's build on what we have. Be aware of what's coming. In ETSI, we have a long-term strategy. We're looking at a technical roadmap, so we know the main areas that are out there. Autonomous networks, artificial intelligence, for sure. We're going to need to do something there, but let's use the building blocks we have in relation to that path. Make sure that the systems we build are reliable, they're safe, they're secure. And a lot of what we do now is no longer just pure ICT. It's more about building trust and ensuring privacy, ensuring that the system is secure as well. So a lot of it is just, we built some great stuff. Let's make sure that it works in the right way. Looking back to 3GPP, 3G, 4G, 5G, the requirements have changed greatly. It used to be about connecting phones, connecting people. Now it's connecting things. Then it will be connecting systems. Data flowing everywhere. We must progress quickly, but use the work that has been done so far. So keep an eye on the radar of what's coming. Know what's in your toolkit. Know what you've got in your pocket. Know where you need to improve, and then move forward. Not alone. I think this is something we need to talk about in this session as well. How can we work together with standards bodies, with research institutes, with open source platforms and institutes as well? We need to work together. Our members are often members of all of those organizations. They have research elements, they work in traditional standards, they work in open source projects, and they have limited resources. We need to deal with the resources we have. So don't duplicate, communicate, and really share the value across all of those platforms.
Ildiko, from the open source foundation side of the equation here, do you follow a similar viewpoint?
Well, when it comes to not jumping on the next big thing, I'm honestly cannot looking forward to it more when Edge will not be on hype anymore, because we will have something else. So those of us who are working on Edge can actually start to get things done. I think like when it comes to working together, don't duplicate, consolidate. I think when something is new, we will not be able to all just work together. It also depends on what you're trying to work together on. Sometimes it is better if you have multiple groups trying to solve very similar challenges from different angles. Not really because of creating competition, that's not the goal of it. Just being able to work in a more focused manner as opposed to forcing everyone to work at one single place and trying to agree on everything, because that doesn't always work out either. So just like with some other things, there's a balancing act here too.
Klaus, what are you seeing within the ZSM group and the ISG communities in terms of operator support, especially from those operators who haven't got the size of, say, Deutsche Telekom, who've got more limited resources, time and people? Do these smaller operators, do they need maybe more concrete proof points before they move towards, say, some of their more open-centric developments and deployments?
I think that is not the case. Not more proof points. I think for them, normally, is a resource problem. It's not a question about open proof points. I think at first they have to understand what is the purpose of the activity which you have, and what is the benefit of them. And then, if that is understood, that is more or less very often the case, then it's really a question of resources. What we are discussing with the smaller operators also in this ISG, they are more or less in the observing mode. They are not delivering written contribution. What they are doing, they are sharing thoughts with us. Because if you write a contribution for an organization like ETSI, then you need a lot of experience, and you need also a lot of time to do that. And that is normally not the case in the smaller operator companies. They have less resources, less time in this side. But they are very difficult, not difficult, they are very able to share clever ideas and clever thoughts. And then we can take that in consideration if we are moving forward with our standards. That is more what they are doing. Observing, contributing verbally instead written contribution.
Thanks, Klaus. Can I ask each of you a final question just before we wrap up the session? Very briefly, if you could, and I'll start with Ildiko. What do we need to do as an industry now to better support the open telecoms ecosystem?
I think as an industry, we have to accept that change is not coming fast and we are still going through it. I also think that we need to look into what we have achieved and how we can take the next steps working together as opposed to creating more competition, especially in fields where these collaborations have already started. And with that, once we have some new business models, new processes, learning from each other how to do this, like smaller operators, are facing resource issues, but once they learn better how these environments work, I think it will be easier for them to decide how to participate. So help each other on all fronts is what I would say is we need to do today.
Thank you. And David, what do we need to do now as an industry?
I think we need to make the most of this strange time and really question where we're going and how we're going there. So the lessons we're learning now during lockdown as we're confined, see how that can be used for the future. We've accelerated certain areas, we put in place new tools, new conversations. We're talking to other standards bodies and to other groups, but don't let that go to waste. We need to learn from the experience and then really beyond just talking, we need to get to action. So I know, Klaus, we've talked about this at length, including yesterday. We must talk less and act more. So let's see what standards are necessary. Let's see where open source is relevant. Let's get that feedback loop between the standards that are necessary and the open source which is necessary, a really efficient feedback loop. Let's get proofs of concept out there. Smaller companies, they want to see that something will work. Let's prove it to them. Let's get demos. Let's get education. Back in the day, standards were really difficult to understand. Now we're working a lot about educating people about standardization and educating them about our standards. NFV, ZSM, they educate and explain the sometimes very complex standards they do. So, adapt and evolve and really move beyond just having a conversation. Let's get to action.
Thank you. And Klaus, final comment from you about what we need to do right now?
Okay, we have to think big. We have to at first have the bigger picture clear, then stop talking and then do it. So do some concrete stuff, as David said before. Time to action is there and not time to talking.
Great. And Chris, we will stop talking and do some action, but first we'll just hear a final word from yourself.
Just to agree with what everyone else has said, I think we have invested in history as an industry in standards. That's where we collaborate. That's where we find that middle ground, and then we differentiate. We need to look at open source in a similar way. We need to look at, okay, we need to invest in open source on the parts where we're not differentiating. We need to have a common investment, make some common decisions as an industry, and say this is what we need to bring up to scratch for our future. And not just invest on how do I differentiate over what the other people are doing and wait for that to set its own path. We need to take a leadership position in how open source evolves as an industry and how it best serves us.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And indeed, to all of you, thank you very much for joining us on the session today. Much appreciated. Now, if you have any questions for our guests or any additional comments or views you wish to add, then please do get in touch with us. And if you want to be part of the ongoing conversation, then you need to join us on our new discussion program, Extra Shot, with Telecom TV's editorial director, Ray Lemaitre. Get in touch with us now through social media or email. Otherwise, please take a look at the sessions that we've already held. They're all available for on-demand viewing now right here on Telecom TV. And we'll be adding future videos to the archive as the week goes on. Coming up next on DSP Leaders World Forum 2020 is our session on 5G as a driver for new business services. And you'll be able to watch that later today from 12 noon UK time. But for now, a final thank you to our panelists and to all of you for watching. Thank you and goodbye.